Friends, let's take up another important aspect and topic in English, that is of speech. Now, what does speech mean? You all know what speeches mean. That is, when a speaker is speaking something, that what is being spoken about becomes the speech. Confusing? Okay, let's imagine you're watching news. We all watch and we should be watching news. When you're sitting in your room and watching news, there's a screen on which the news reporter is reading it. Now, when the news reporter is narrating something or telling you something about any news, there are two ways of telling it. One is that, okay, today the Prime Minister of India had banned the old notes. Now, this is one type of saying it. Or they say, today the Prime Minister of India had said, and the screen freezes and then comes the Prime Minister's picture and what exactly he said. Okay. Now, under that you see the subtitles, there would be inverted commas of what exactly word to word the Prime Minister had said. Now, these are the two ways of narrating a speech. Okay, it's not narrating, but when you are reporting what a speaker had spoken about, that is what is speech. Now, there are two kinds. One is called a direct speech, the other is called an indirect speech. Now, what happens in a direct speech? Direct speech is when you are actually saying word to word of what the speaker had said. What exactly the Prime Minister said comes within the inverted commas, saying the Prime Minister had said within inverted commas, notes will be banned from today. But if this is not the way you want it in an indirect speech way, the reporter would say that the Prime Minister had said that the notes will be banned from today. Now, this is the difference between a direct speech and an indirect speech, where in direct speech, exactly the words spoken by the speaker are given in the sentence, whereas in the indirect speech, you are reporting what was said by the speaker. So, from the example, what could you make out? Now, what contributes to a direct speech? What are the things which are related to direct speech? It conveys exactly what is being said by the speaker. There is no interpretations, there are no additions, or there are no misinterpretations. It is exactly what the speaker had said comes in the quotes. So, there is nothing misinterpreted here. Second is, whenever you want to give significance to what the speaker is saying, the subject matter, then it is very evident that you have to use the direct speech, because the same thing when spoken by a third person becomes completely different or conveys something different. If you want that to be passed directly as it is being said, direct speech has to be used. Now, the third and the most important thing in a direct speech is it creates interest. See, if there is an interview and you would know what exactly your favorite superstar had spoken about, it would be more interesting to hear exactly what words are being spoken. Not just the superstar, but anybody of relevance. If somebody is speaking something, you would want to know what are those exact words, because those are what will inspire you, interest you. Now, these are the things why and when you should be using the direct speech. But where would we professionals use direct speech? Can you just imagine? Because where is that you need exact words to be reported? You cannot be thinking. Remember the business organization, how it works? You have the chairman or the CEO, then you have the different unit heads of finance, production, marketing, then you have the executives. You cannot be saying that the chairman said and then comes the quote, and then the manager said, then comes the quote, and then the executive said, then comes the quote, and the last executive gets to know. This is so tedious. In these sort of communications, you cannot be using direct speech. But what you need to remember is there are something called meetings. When you are writing or reporting what decisions have been taken in such meetings, it is always appropriate to use the direct speech, because there you are emphasizing exactly what has been decided or said by that concerned person. So, when you are writing minutes to the meetings, that's where most of us professionals would be using this direct speech. So, everywhere else where you are not using direct speech, you use indirect speech. So, most often whenever there is personal conversations or personal interactions, we always use indirect speech. Imagine you are coming back from college and then your mom is there and she asks you that, are you going to college tomorrow? Because tomorrow is Sunday. You start off saying, actually mom, my principal said, quote unquote, from tomorrow there would not be extra classes. But then after that, my HOD said, quote unquote, that all the students who need extra classes shall be provided on requirement basis. After that, then my class teacher comes to us and says, quote unquote, that if you really need it, tell us in beforehand, 1 week before, only then can we organize this. And then my friend said, Mom, quote unquote, that do you want to come? But Mom, I wanted to ask you after coming home that should I go? Now imagine if you are going to give this bigger conversation for a simple answer whether you are going to go tomorrow or not. Because your mom asked, because tomorrow is an extra class, would you be going tomorrow or not? If not, she'll happily sleep at home. Otherwise what? She will have to prepare breakfast for you. But for that, what could you simply say? That no, the principal has cancelled all the classes and I have decided not to go, so I will not be going. This is what you needed to say. Because your mother, the minute you start this whole lengthy conversation of quote unquote, your mother would say, please stop this nonsense. Tell me whether you are going or not going. So this is where in such conversation, to avoid this lengthy conversations, you want to just concisely put it across what is the point of message. That's when you need to use indirect speech. So remember, the main objective of all our communication or business reporting is effective communication. So you should know the relevance only when you want to emphasize something which is being said word to word by a prominent personality or a subject. Then you have to use a direct speech. In all other cases, it is always preferable to use indirect speech. So friends, then if you have to use indirect speech, then why are we learning about direct speech? Because you will come across those circumstances where you might have to use the direct speech, and you should be able to comprehend, understand when there is something given in direct speech, how do you present it back? How do you take it forward from there and communicate it further in an indirect speech? So it is very important for us to know the rules. Just like we learned the rules from active voice to passive voice and passive voice to active voice, we are going to learn the rules which are required to change from direct speech to indirect speech and vice versa. So let's start off. Now the first rule when you are changing from direct speech to indirect speech is related to verbs and tenses. Now if the reporting verb is in past tense, that is, if I am saying that he said or she said is in the past tense, that is the reporting verb. Now the tenses, the verbs in the sentence, in the direct speech will change from present to past tense, from past tense to past perfect, and from future to present conditional. Now let's take an example. If I say I am reading a book, this is in present tense, right? Now this comes under the quotes unquotes. Now what happens? He said I am reading a book. When this is the sentence given to you in direct speech, no or yes, this is the sentence which is given to you in direct speech, because there is few words which in the inverted commas ending with a full stop, okay, and there is something as a person saying he said. He said I am reading a book. Now because the reporting verb is in past tense but the direct speech is in present tense, that direct speech tense turns into past tense. So when you convert into indirect speech, it becomes he said that. You always need to add the conjunction when you are converting it from direct speech to indirect speech. He said that he was reading a book. It was in direct speech under present tense, but when you converted it into indirect speech, it became past tense. So if the sentence in direct speech is he said I am reading a book, under indirect speech it would become he said that he was reading a book. So friends, if the reporting verb is past tense, then you have three rules. The present tense becomes past tense. Now he said I am reading a book becomes he said he was reading a book. Now if it is past tense, then it becomes past perfect. He said I was reading a book becomes he said that he had been reading a book. Now if it becomes future in the direct speech, then it would become present conditional. He said, quote unquote, I will read a book would become, he said that he shall read a book. So if you see, there is a clear transformation of a present tense becoming past tense becoming past perfect, and future becoming present conditional. But remember, if the reporting verb is present tense, if the sentence says, he says I am reading a book, then the indirect speech sentence, the verb tense would not change. It would say, he says I am reading a book, he says that he is reading a book. The tense has not changed. This is the exception you need to remember when you are converting it from direct speech to indirect speech. So these are the rules which were related to changing tenses of the verbs. There is an exception to this. Now what is this exception? If what is being said is still relevant, or it is a universal truth which you are speaking about, in these two cases the tenses will not change. Imagine if it says, he says I like reading a book. This is quote unquote under direct speech. Under indirect speech, what happens? That's the relevant, right? It is still relevant. If that person is still alive, he still likes reading a book. The relevance has not changed of the subject. Now in this case, under indirect speech, what would that sentence become? He says that he likes reading books. You could still say that, or you could even say he liked reading books. But it is always preferable to say, he says that he likes reading books. Take the sentence, he said, reading books is good. Now this is a universal truth. It is very good to read books. If you really want to do well in communication, I suggest personally read as many books as possible. So let's get back to the sentence. He said, reading books is good. Now try to convert this into indirect speech. What happens? Because this is a universal truth, the tense doesn't change. It is still relevant. The subject we are talking about is still relevant. He said that reading books is good. It still remains the same.